Chapter 2, Echoes of the Dragon. Morthal Pashtor stirred, the bitter taste of the healing potion still lingering on his tongue as he talked with Ilara. The cavern around them was littered with the remains of goblins and their bugbear leader, the air thick with the scent of battle and the quiet hum of lingering magic. Morthal's eyes had adjusted to the dim light, and he catched the haunted gaze of Ilara Morningvale, whose hands trembled ever so slightly on the hilt of his twin swords.
"Are you all right?"
Ilara asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Morthal nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
"Thanks to you all. The strength of our team prevails once more."
Unnoticed by the others, Balin's Stonehammer hefted a barrel of ale onto his sturdy shoulder. The dwarf slipped away into the shadows, the promise of solitude and strong drink more appealing than the dangers of the goblin cave. Gathered near the cave's entrance, Zira Darkmire brushed a speck of dirt from her crimson cloak, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the group.
"We've pushed ourselves to the brink. A rest is not just preferred, it's necessary."
Ilara sheathed his swords, his gaze distant.
"There's one more tunnel we haven't explored. If the Rockseeker dwarves are captive there, we can't afford to wait."
Morthal stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calm.
Ilara is right. Every moment counts. We scout the cave, assess the threat, and if it's too great, we withdraw.
Zira crossed her arms, her posture elegant yet defiant.
"And if we stumble into another horde? Some of us aren't exactly in peak condition."
She continued, looking at Morthal. Doreen flashed a mischievous grin, her fingers idly twirling a lock of her hair.
"Come on, Zira. Where's your sense of adventure? Besides, think of the treasures that might await."
Zira sighed dramatically.
Fine, but let's at least have a plan that doesn't involve me being left in the dark again."
Morthal nodded.
Agreed. Ilara, you'll scout ahead. I'll follow closely. Doreen and Zira, you provide light and cover from behind.
Zira raised an eyebrow.
"You mean that I provide magical light for Doreen while I juggle a mere torch? Splendid."
Ilara glanced at her, a hint of a smile playing on his lips.
"We'll make it quick."
Before they set off, Doreen sidled up to Morthal.
"Any inspiring words before we plunge back into danger?"
Morthal chuckled softly.
The promise of battle should be enough inspiration.
The group moved into the tunnel, Ilara and Morthal leading the way. The silence was broken only by the faint clinking of Morthal's chainmail, which echoed ominously off the damp walls. Ilara paused at a bend, peering ahead with his keen elven sight. He turned back, whispering,
"I see 2 goblins by a fire. Should be easy enough."
Morthal nodded.
We strike swiftly, no alarms.
But as they rounded the corner, Ilara's eyes widened. There were not 2, but a dozen goblins scattered around the cavern, some dozing, others gnawing on scraps of meat. His pulse quickened, a familiar darkness creeping into the edges of his vision. Without warning, he let out a fierce war cry.
"Die, you weaklings!"
He charged forward, his blades flashing in the firelight. The first goblin fell instantly, barely registering the attack. The cavern erupted into chaos as goblins scrambled for weapons, their shrieks filling the air.
Ilara, wait!
Morthal shouted, but it was too late. Doreen and Zira rushed in behind them. The rogue ducked behind a stalagmite as she muttered a quick prayer to whichever god might be listening, her fingers brushing against the mummified goblin hand she wore as a talisman. She released an arrow, but it clattered harmlessly against the stone.
"Blast it!"
She cursed under her breath. Zira stepped into the cavern, her confidence wavering as her eyes took in the sheer number of goblins swarming within. Her heart pounded, and for a moment panic seized her. She stumbled back, her aim faltering as she unleashed a firebolt that veered off course, sizzling past a goblin's ear and scorching the wall behind it.
There are too many!
She gasped, her voice betraying her fear. Morthal gripped his warhammer, pushing through the tangle of bodies to reach Ilara, who was engulfed in a frenzy. The elf moved with lethal grace, each swing of his swords cutting down foes, but his eyes were distant, consumed by some inner torment.
Ilara! Focus!
Morthal called out, but the elf did not respond. A goblin lunged at Morthal, and he instinctively raised his shield, the creature's blade scraping uselessly against it. With a swift counterattack, he brought his hammer down, crushing the goblin's foot and sending it howling to the ground. Across the cavern, Doreen gritted her teeth, loosing another arrow. It whizzed past a goblin, embedding itself in a moldy tapestry.
What is wrong with me today?
Zyra steadied herself, determination hardening her features. She extended her hand, conjuring another firebolt that struck a goblin square in the chest, sending it sprawling. A spark of satisfaction ignited within her.
That's more like it.
As the tide of battle shifted, the goblins' numbers dwindled. Morthal spotted a larger goblin barking orders from atop a ledge.
Their leader is mine,
he declared. Zira met his gaze, a hint of challenge in her eyes.
Not if I get him first.
She unleashed a potent firebolt that struck the goblin leader, flames licking at its armor. Seizing the opportunity, Morthal bounded up the steps, his warhammer connecting with a resounding crunch. The goblin toppled, silence falling over the cavern. Breathing heavily, Morthal surveyed the aftermath. Ilara stood amidst the fallen, his twin swords still clenched tightly in his hands, eyes wild and unfocused. He struck down at a goblin corpse, then another, his movements driven by a lingering fury.
Ilara,
Morthal called gently, stepping cautiously toward him.
it's over. The battle is won.
Ilara's gaze darted around the cavern, his chest heaving.
They keep coming. They never stop.
He muttered, raising his sword again. Morthal reached out and firmly grasped Ilara's wrist.
Look at me. The goblins are defeated. You can stand down.
Ilara blinked rapidly, the haze of battle slowly lifting from his eyes. His grip on the swords loosened.
It's over,
he whispered, as if uncertain. Morthal nodded reassuringly.
Yes, it's over. Thanks to all of us.
Nearby, Doreen casually slipped to the goblin leader's body, her nimble fingers deftly pocketing a pouch of coins and a jeweled dagger. She glanced around, ensuring no one had noticed, a sly smile playing on her lips.
Well, that was invigorating.
She quipped, joining the others. Zira approached the captive bound in the corner, a weary human with eyes that held stories untold.
Hold still,
she instructed, slicing through his restraints with a flourish. Thank you, the man rasped. I'm Sildar Hallwinter. Zyra offered a water skin.
Drink. You're safe now.
Sildar took a grateful sip before urging, We must leave. More goblins could return at any moment. As they made their way out, Ilara lingered, his gaze fixed on the slain goblins.
Evil must be destroyed,
he murmured.
It's not enough to kill it.
Morthal placed a firm hand on his shoulder.
Come, Ilara. The battle is won.
The group reunited with their wagons hidden among the trees. Balin staggered into view, humming a tuneless song, his cheeks flushed and his helmet askew. He wiped ale from his beard and hiccuped loudly.
Missed all the fun, did I? Or were there always two of each of ya?
Doreen rolled her eyes.
Somehow I think you had your own version of fun.
That evening, campfires flickered under a canopy of stars. Sildar recounted his tale, his voice steady despite the hardships he'd endured. I'm not merely a bodyguard. I serve the Lord's Alliance, tasked with maintaining order between Neverwinter, Waterdeep, and Baldur's Gate. He spoke of the Wave Echo Cave, the legendary mine lost to time, and the dwarves' rediscovery of its location. Goblins attacked us, seeking the map to the cave. They mentioned someone, or something, called the Black Spider. Zyra leaned forward, intrigue gleaming in her eyes.
And this black spider? Any idea who or what they are?
Sildar shook his head. Only rumors, but whoever it is, they wield influence over these creatures. I fear for the Rockseeker brothers. Morthal's expression was resolute.
The weak need the protection of the strong. We will help you find them.
Sildar managed a weary smile. Your aid is most welcome. Upon our arrival in Phandalin, I can offer you 50 gold pieces. Doreen's eyes briefly flickered with interest at the mention of gold, but she masked it with a casual shrug.
We're heading that way anyhow.
As the others settled in for the night, Zira approached Ilara, who stood at the edge of the camp, gazing into the darkness.
Your skill in battle today was impressive,
she began, her tone uncharacteristically soft. Ilara glanced at her, surprise evident.
I thank you, but it's merely a means to an end. Evil must be eradicated.
She studied him for a moment, noting the shadows that lingered in his eyes.
You carry a heavy burden.
He looked away.
We all have our pasts.
Zyra hesitated before placing a delicate hand on his arm.
Perhaps, but sometimes sharing the weight can lighten the load.
Ilara opened his mouth to reply, but found no words. Zira offered a faint smile before returning to the warmth of the fire, leaving him to contemplate her unexpected kindness. The journey to Phandalin was mercifully uneventful. The town unfolded before them, a modest settlement with an undercurrent of tension. Villagers moved briskly, their gazes averted. Clusters of red-cloaked mercenaries loitered near buildings, their eyes tracking the newcomers.
I don't like the feel of this place,
Morthal grumbled. Balin's eyes lit up at the sight of a tavern sign.
I feel like it has plenty of ale needing my attention,
he said, already veering toward the inn. Sildar adjusted his gear. I'll speak with the town master, Harbin Wester. Perhaps he can shed some light on the situation.
While you do that, we can replenish our supplies,
Morthal suggested. They dispersed into the town. Doreen slipped into a leatherworker's shop, admiring a set of finely crafted armor.
This will do nicely,
She mused, jingling the coins she'd acquired. Zyra perused a clothier's stall, her fingers trailing over luxurious fabrics. She selected a gown of deep sapphire, its hue complementing her fiery hair.
Perfect,
she whispered, envisioning the impression she would make. Ilara and Morthal restocked provisions, the cleric noting the wary glances cast their way.
Fear hangs heavy here,
he observed. Ilara nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere.
Something stirs beneath the surface.
That evening, the group reconvened at the Stonehill Inn. The common room buzzed with muted conversations, the patrons casting occasional glances at the red-cloaked figures who occupied a corner table. Zyra entered last, her new gown draping elegantly over her form, the scent of jasmine trailing in her wake. As she swept into the room, she noticed Doreen's gleaming new armor. A knowing glint sparkled in Zira's eyes. She could guess how Doreen had financed such a purchase. Conversations paused as eyes turned towards Zira, admiration and envy flickering across faces. She reveled in the attention, a satisfied smile curving her lips.
Making an entrance, I see.
Doreen teased.
One must uphold certain standards.
Zira replied smoothly, her gaze briefly lingering on Doreen's armor.
I see you've made some investments yourself.
Sildar joined them, his expression grave. I've spoken with Harbin. There's troubling news. He recounted the sightings of Cryovane, the white dragon that now claimed the Sword Mountains as its domain. The dragon's emergence has emboldened the orc tribes. Raids are increasing, and the town is ill-prepared. At the mention of the dragon, Zira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. A distant memory stirred, a fragment of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. She clenched her hands to steady herself.
Any idea what awakened Cryovane?
Morthal asked. Sildar shook his head. None. But the timing is suspicious given the goblin's activities and the mention of this black spider. Ilara leaned forward, his gaze intense.
What do you need from us?
I have friends scattered around the region, an archaeological team of dwarves, a group of gnome hermits, and a healer who resides in a windmill near here. They must be warned of the dangers. Morthal didn't hesitate.
We'll see to it.
Zyra raised an eyebrow.
Playing messenger now, are we?
Doreen nudged her.
Think of it as an opportunity. Besides, there's bound to be something in it for us.
Sildar offered a thin smile. I can provide compensation, of course. But more importantly, lives are at stake. Ilara's voice was steady.
We cannot ignore those in need.
As the evening wore on, Ilara found himself addressing the group.
The shadows gather, and the forces of evil grow bold. We must be vigilant.
Doreen smirked.
Always the ray of sunshine, aren't you?
He met her gaze, unflinching.
Darkness thrives when the light falters.
Morthal stood, stretching.
On that note, we should rest. Tomorrow brings new challenges.
Zyra watched as Ilara retreated to a corner table, his expression pensive. Impulsively, she approached him once more.
You speak of shadows and light, yet you seem lost in your own darkness.
He looked up, surprised.
Observant of you.
She tilted her head.
It's hard not to notice. Perhaps one day you'll tell me about it.
Perhaps.
He conceded, his gaze distant, shadows clouding his features. She nodded, accepting the small victory.
Until then, try not to brood too much. It might give you wrinkles.
He chuckled softly, a sound that seemed almost foreign.
I'll keep that in mind.
As the inn settled into quiet, each member of the party grappled with their own thoughts. Morthal contemplated the responsibilities that lay ahead, his duty to protect weighing heavily. Doreen counted her coins, plans for future acquisitions forming. Balin was still at the bar, attempting to balance a tankard of ale on his helmet while singing a dwarven drinking song horribly out of tune. Ilara sat by the hearth, staring into the flames as shadows of his past flickered in his eyes. The weight of his memories pressed upon him, yet amidst the warmth, he felt a glimmer of solace. And somewhere deep within Zira, a fissure formed in the armor she wore around her heart. The dragon's awakening stirred something in her blood, a call she didn't yet understand, but could no longer ignore. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but for the first time threads of connection began to weave between them, binding their fates in ways unseen.
In the murk of twilight's endly game, scarred souls whispering each other's name. Through the haunted night we wander free, bound by shadows, yearning to be. Glimmers of fate tangled up in time. Hands once trembled, now hold in rhyme. Every scar tell stories left untold. In our hearts, our future braves the cold. Raise your voice, let the echoes fight. Walls of sorrow, faded and kind, together we'll rise amid the dark unknown. With hope as our guide, our hearts be shown. Whispers carry on the autumn breeze, binding souls through distant mournful seas. Eyes once hollowed now see the dawn in unity, our shadows forego. Moonlight's grace lights our chosen path. Wounds once deep, now healing at last. In this realm, both ancient and new, destiny binds us forever true. Raise your voice, let the echoes fight. Walls of sorrow, faded and kind, together we'll rise amid the dark unknown. With hope as our guide, our hearts